So, welcome to our first talk on newly diagnosed type 1 diabetes. So, I was diagnosed when I was 15, and this is a life-changing diagnosis. And when you get it, you're going to have a zillion questions. And hopefully you have somebody guiding you through carb counting and taking insulin and things like that. But I wanted to address some of the questions that might be harder to find answers to. And so let's get to them. So first, my story, just to give myself some street cred about, getting diabetes. So I was diagnosed when I was 15, but I was a really awkward 15-year-old. So this is a picture of me when I was cute, like 8 years old. So here I was, and I had all the classic symptoms. I was drinking like nonstop. Like I could not get enough fluids, drinking like water, juice, everything. And then of course, peeing all the time, waking up 2 or 3 nights or times a night to pee. I also had blurred vision. I lost like 10 to 15 pounds that I didn't have to lose back then. I was already a really skinny kid. And so the story goes that I finally went to an urgent care. They tested my blood sugar, and I remember it just coming back saying high. And these meters usually read up to like 600 milligrams per deciliter. So literally my blood sugars were off the charts. And the doctor said to me and my mom, he said, he didn't say anything about diabetes. Just said like, you need to go to the hospital to get checked out, something like that. And so he said, but before you go, you can go home, get a change of clothes, get your blanket, your toothbrush, whatever you want to do, and then, go to the hospital. So we went home, got my stuff, and I said, Mom, I don't really want to go to the hospital just yet. I'm hungry. Can we go get something to eat? And she said, sure. So instead of going right to the hospital, we went to Chili's. And I remember having a full rack of baby back ribs with the little like spicy apple stuff. And I was drinking regular soda, free refills. So I was getting Cokes and diet, or not diet, Dr. Peppers, everything. Of course, my blood sugars were going through the roof. Finished up at Chili's and went to the hospital. And when we got there, they said, oh my gosh, where have you been? We've been waiting for you. Tested my blood sugar. It was over 1,000. They rushed me right to the intensive care unit where I was there for 4 or 5 days to learn about my new life with type 1 diabetes. So I always tell people I went from Chili's to the intensive care unit in like 10 minutes. And this was, early 90s. So this was my first blood sugar meter. It was called the One Touch Basic. I love that even then they knew it was basic. It took like 45 seconds to a minute to give a result. And usually it was error. This thing just like didn't work well. I'd have to hide it under my desk in high school. It was really embarrassing to have to use this. And this was my first insulin. It was regular insulin and NPH. You had to mix it together into one syringe and do an injection. It didn't work that well. I had all kinds of like low blood sugar issues. Didn't have a continuous glucose monitor. Didn't have a pump. And of course, I thought my life was over. Here I am. I'm a 15-year-old kid. This was just not on my radar at all. I was thinking when I went to the hospital, okay, give me the anti-diabetes pill. I'll be fixed and I can get on with my life. And so it takes a while to realize this is a lifelong diagnosis. And what does this mean for the rest of my life? So you probably can relate to that story in some way. If you were diagnosed as an adult, though, you might have had a more nebulous course. They might have even thought you had type 2 diabetes when you first got it, which can be really frustrating. They try you on metformin, these kinds of things. It's much easier to identify type 1 in kids because pediatricians are used to seeing it. If you were diagnosed at 20, 30, 40, chances are that it took you a while to get that diagnosis. So let's start with the basics. Questions 1. What is type 1 diabetes and why did I get it? Well, type 1 diabetes is what we call an autoimmune disease, in which your own immune system, which normally fights viruses and bacteria, it's a good thing, misrecognizes the cells in the pancreas that make insulin and attacks and destroys them. So here's a picture of the pancreas. And like 99% of the pancreas is dedicated to digestion, specifically breaking down fats and proteins when it comes into your digestive tract. But about less than 1% of the pancreas is made up of these little islets. Another word for islets is islands, really, like kind of speckled throughout the pancreas. And within these islets, there's multiple cells that release different hormones. There's the alpha cells, beta cells, delta cells, epsilon cells. And the beta cells are the ones that make insulin. So it's the beta cells of the pancreas that are specifically attacked and destroyed by the immune system. And it's really a specific attack. The rest of the pancreas is left untouched. Even the neighboring alpha cells and delta cells are left alone. It's those beta cells that for whatever reason the immune system identifies as foreign and goes after them. And we don't know why. So this is an immune cell, a T cell, if you will, and he shows up with his little boxing gloves ready to fight here. And he starts kind of knocking off the beta cells, like literally almost one by one. You can see these little red X's appearing on it. And this happens over months to years. This is a very slow process that's happening kind of silently without you knowing it. And it's not till you get down to less than 20% of your beta cells left that you get high blood sugars. And he finally says, whoops, my bad. And it is this guy's bad because this isn't what he's supposed to be doing. This is a completely kind of dysregulated system. So, and again, it's important to know that this has been going on for years. So when you actually got high blood sugars, this immune process had likely been going on for a long time. There's usually a final trigger, some kind of, infection or stressor that brings it out. It's not what causes type 1 diabetes, but it's kind of the final straw. So for example, when I got type 1 diabetes, when my blood sugars went really high, I had like a cold right before I got it. That cold didn't give me type 1, it was just the final stress. So this is interesting. You can get type 1 at any age. And why do I have a pizza? I have no idea. I just was feeling hungry when I made these slides, and it's easy to cut up a pizza, right? So half of people get it when they're less than 18 as kids, and half of these people get it when they're adults. So we always think about it as a pediatric disease, and it is common in kids. I got it when I was 15, but you can get it at any age. I recently saw a patient that got it in her 80s. So type 1 diabetes can happen at any time. So people always ask this, will my kids or family get it? That's a great question. And I think when I got it, I kind of assumed that if I had kids that they would just get type 1 diabetes, and it's not true. Most type 1s are the only person with type 1 diabetes in their entire family. Nobody else in my family has type 1 diabetes. Nobody else in Dr. Edelman's family has type 1 diabetes. And that's actually the most common thing. It seems to kind of come out of nowhere, if you will. So, and I say I'm the proud black sheep of my family, and I got this like black sheep in here, and he looks super cool. He's got like, I don't know, studded bracelets on and earrings. So I call this guy the type 1 diabadass, that you're probably the only type 1 in your family. Now, there are these families where it does run in the family, like, there's 3 kids and all of them have it, but that tends to be more rare. So some specific numbers here in terms of rates of getting type 1 and type 2. I'll just highlight the type 1 here. So I think what's maybe the most important is this one, if your mother has type 1 or your father has type 1. And that basically means that if you have kids, so I have 2 children, their risk of getting it is about 4 to 5%. Another way of saying that is there's about a 95% chance or more that they will not get type 1 diabetes. And look, that the rates are actually much higher for type 2. So sometimes people will say, well, type 1, that's the genetic one, right? And I think that what they mean by that is that, well, it wasn't your fault. You didn't, gain weight, things like that. But really type 2 is much more genetic. And so if you look at the final column where it says, if you have an identical twin, if somebody with type 2 diabetes or has an identical twin, it's about 100% chance that the other twin will get it. Very genetic. In type 1s, it's about a 50-50. So another way of saying that is that genetics explains some of type 1 diabetes, but certainly not all of it. There's something else in the environment that triggers it, and we don't know what that is. There's lots of theories, viruses, vitamin D exposure, gluten. Nothing's really panned out, and I believe that there's not a single cause for type 1 diabetes, that it's likely to have many things that kind of converge into ending up with diabetes. So then you got it. Is there a cure? Should I do a clinical trial? Well, the blunt truth is there is no cure. Lots of research going on in this area. People can do pancreas transplants and these things, but they're very intense surgeries. They require immunosuppression, so it's not for the masses. In terms of should you do a clinical trial, that is a great question, because when you're first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, you still make some insulin. Like I said, 20% of those cells could still be around, and those are worth trying to save. So if you are going to do a clinical trial, right when you're diagnosed tends to be the time to do it. And it's hard to find, clinical trials in your area. I'd recommend, at the JDRF website, they have a list of trials. You can just kind of Google your local academic university. Here in town would be UCSD. Wherever you are, look for the endocrinology department. You can cold email people. Just say, hey, can you point me in the direction? I have a son or daughter that's just diagnosed, or I was just diagnosed. We'd love to know about clinical trials in your area. And it's worth looking into. Every trial has its ups and downs, whether or not you're going to get a placebo, etc. But it's a time to intervene. And the way that I look at this is that this is your opportunity to do a study. And there's really no downside because unfortunately type 1 diabetes does progress. meaning those remaining cells will die eventually, and there is an opportunity to try to stop that progression. So, question number 4, I'm not using much insulin. How long will this last? Well, when you're first diagnosed, especially as an adult, you tend to still make a bunch of insulin. And you might not even need to take much insulin injections. A lot of the times adults will just need a basal insulin, and they won't need anything for meals. And how rapidly those beta cells are destroyed is really variable. Some people will go on to needing full insulin in a matter of months, and sometimes it takes years. So the thing you need to know is you need to be on at least basal insulin and then take as much rapid-acting insulin with meals as you need to control your blood sugars. And over time, you will need more insulin. That doesn't mean that you're doing a bad job. It just means that unfortunately those remaining cells that are making insulin continue to die. And as that happens, you'll be more dependent on the injections. So to be honest, when I meet patients like this, I'm a little jealous, that they don't require as much insulin. So it is a good thing. And just be aware that over time, things will change. So question 5, is taking insulin bad for me? And the short answer to this is no. That people can get really hung up on, I really just don't want to take that many units. When I eat X, Y, or Z, I have to take a lot more insulin. Is that a bad thing? I always tell people that everybody, when they eat, needs insulin. And the difference with somebody without type 1 diabetes and with type 1 diabetes is if, Eric, who's filming this, just went out and ate a chocolate sundae, his body would make as much insulin as it needs to control his blood sugars. And you're emulating that with the injectable insulin. So if you eat more carbs or more food, you take more insulin to control your blood sugars, and you take the dose that you need to control your blood sugars. It's not bad for you. Can I eat carbs? What should my diet look like? So I find, especially when people are newly diagnosed, a lot of times they go fully extreme, like do not eat carbs at all. They don't want to take insulin with their meals, so they'll just really kind of ratchet down on how many carbs they eat. And if that works for you and that's sustainable, great. That actually eating low carb is a very effective way to control your blood sugars, but you don't have to do that. If you like eating carbs, then you can eat carbs. You just need to take insulin with it. And there's no specific diabetes diet. So there's obviously a lot of information out there what people with diabetes should or shouldn't be eating. We should eat healthy just like anybody else. We shouldn't be eating donuts every day. We should watch our calories. We should watch our carbs. You need to be very mindful of your weight. It's very easy to gain weight with type 1 diabetes. 2/3 of type 1s in the country now are either overweight or obese. So it's just kind of common sense, everything in moderation. When you eat carbs, cover it with insulin. The less carbs you eat, maybe the more kind of friendly your blood sugars do. But there's no diet that you absolutely have to be on. I tend to eat lower carb just because I find it easier on my blood sugars. When I say low carb, I mean 30 grams or less per meal is kind of my goal. And the less carbs I eat, the less fluctuations I tend to have. Can I or should I exercise? Question number 7. Short answer is yes. Absolutely, exercise is very effective in terms of just your overall health, and it improves your insulin sensitivity. So Steve always says that exercise helps make up for mistakes. And that's kind of how I view it. The more I exercise, I feel that the more liberal I can be with my diet. I'm more insulin sensitive, so it just seems my blood sugars are in range overall better. Just as an example, over the holidays, I wasn't exercising. I actually got COVID then too, so I wasn't exercising for at least a month. My blood sugars were just a mess. Just so much harder to control your blood sugars when you're not moving, because that exercise helps your muscle, your fat tissue soak up the glucose. It just makes it more responsive to the insulin. That's what insulin sensitivity means. So that's all good news. The bad news is that exercise in of itself, the actual act of exercise, can be difficult to control your blood sugars. Typically, people can go low while they're exercising, or they may rebound up after exercising. So it's still probably the number one thing I struggle with in terms of controlling my blood sugars. Doesn't mean don't do it. It's quite the opposite. Absolutely do it. You just have to educate yourself with what's going on when you exercise in terms of how you should adjust your insulin, how you should take carbs, the differences between kind of cardiovascular exercise and weightlifting is really important. So this is where I have to give us a shout out for a video, and actually multiple videos that we've done on this topic. So this was a dose of Dr. E. I'm just going to fast forward here. It's in our video vault. So if you go to tcoyd.org, click on video vault, and then type 1 lectures, you'll be organized, or it'll be organized by, diet and medications, and then lifestyle exercises all in there also. So in this challenge, Steve did 45 minutes on a treadmill. I did 45 minutes on a Peloton, and we talk a lot about how to plan for exercise, what to do during exercise, and what to expect after. So this is probably a 30-minute video, and there's a number of 20, 30-minute videos on our website. Absolutely watch some of these if you plan to exercise, because this knowledge is really power in this area. And until I sat down and dedicated some time to thinking about what was going on with my blood sugars, it was really frustrating. So bottom line is, please exercise. Do something that you like to do. Don't, sometimes when people are diagnosed, they'll say, well, gosh, I'm just going to start running now. If you've never ran in your life, it might be hard to get into. So the key is find something that you like. For me, I do like to Peloton. I'm just not a runner. I'm just not a runner. Not built for it. My feet hurt, etc. So I like the Peloton. Steve likes it as well. Find something that you like to do. Work it into your life. We say 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, if you can. And that just means something sustained. Walking around the neighborhood for 30 minutes, or doing something like a Peloton or going to the gym, etc. All right. So what about this? Can I drink alcohol? And this is a perfect example of a question that people want to know, but are maybe afraid to ask your provider because you don't want to be judged. So the answer, again, is kind of like the diet. You should drink alcohol just like everybody else does. Obviously, everything in moderation, nothing in excess. Drinking large amounts of alcohol is not good for anybody, but you can safely drink a moderate amount of alcohol and be okay. So the American Diabetes Association actually has specific recommendations for this. 1 drink a day for women, 2 drinks a day for men. And I always make the joke that these aren't like rollover minutes. You can't stock them up and not drink for 4 days and then just drink 10 on one day. But you, again, have to be very knowledgeable about what's going on with alcohol. In general, alcohol itself lowers your blood sugar, but alcohol is generally mixed with things like there's lots of carbs in beer. There's a ton of carbs in a Mai Tai, but there's no carbs in just like a shot of whiskey. So you have to know the differences in what's going on with what you're drinking. So here's, can you drink? This picture kind of says it all. So I have to, again, mention this other video we did. This is Steve and I actually drinking in real time. I drank 3 IPA beers in 45 minutes, and that's why my shirt fell off. And Steve drank 3 old fashions, so kind of like hard alcohol versus beer. And we did this really honestly. We obviously had a good time with it, not to glorify alcohol by any means, but show that just drinking beers, my blood sugars went through the roof. I went to 200, 250. And Steve, drinking the same amount of alcohol, but with different mixers and a hard alcohol, his blood sugars really didn't budge at all. And so we showed the effects of drinking in real time, and then also what happened hours after I was drinking that beer as the alcohol made my blood sugars go down. So just like everything, you can do it. You just have to know what you're putting in your body, what kind of results you might expect. Be prepared, be safe, always have a continuous glucose monitor, but you can do these things. And so again, arm yourself with knowledge. Question 9, is getting low bad for me? No. So being low sucks. It doesn't feel good, but it's not doing any damage. So they've studied this, a lot. And, I hate having low blood sugars. Sometimes you can feel washed out for, minutes, hours afterwards, but it's not doing any long-term damage. We do know that the more lows you have, the more set up you are to get a bad low. So basically more lows means that you can have more lows. Your body gets kind of used to it, if you will. So avoiding hypoglycemia in general is key, but I don't want you feeling like, gosh, I had a bad low. Am I just knocking off brain cells? Certainly if you have a very bad low, a seizure, you're knocked out, those kinds of things, those can be more serious. But these kind of run-of-the-mill low blood sugars, don't worry about them hurting you. Still want to avoid them, but just don't stress about it. Okay, what kind of stuff should I be on? A pump, a CGM? I was just diagnosed. What should I be on? So there's no wrong way to do type 1 diabetes, but everybody should be on a continuous glucose monitor, CGM. This is a device I wear. Mine's on my leg. It measures my glucose every 5 minutes, sends it to my watch, sends it to my phone. I can see what my blood sugar is all the time, be alerted if I'm high, low. I can share my information with Steve. He can follow my blood sugars if I'm in Japan. It's really been just a godsend in terms of managing diabetes. Everybody should be on it. If you want to be on a pump, God bless you. But, that's more of a discussion you can have with your provider. You may not need a pump when you're first diagnosed, but you absolutely will need a continuous glucose monitor. So this is just my diabetes technology through the years. 94, I had this One Touch Basic. Then I got the One Touch 2. And then, like a decade later, the meters finally got smaller, and it took like 5 seconds to get a reading instead of a minute. And then finally I got my first continuous glucose monitor in 2010. The sensors only lasted like 3 days. They were really inaccurate. And over time, it then became like the iPhone, like every year a new kind of update. And then finally in 2018, we got the Dexcom G6. You don't have to prick your finger anymore. Very accurate. And I just mentioned all the pros of it. So just to show that forever, there was no changes. It took 10 years to make a smaller meter, whoop-de-doo. And now it's like every year there's getting new updates. There's new systems coming out all the time. Dexcom's having their G7 coming out. The Abbott Libre, the Senseonics. There's multiple continuous glucose monitors to choose from to fit your lifestyle that maybe work with your pump. So definitely talk to your provider about it and educate yourself on the pros and cons of each of these systems. So question 11. Am I going to get complications? And the answer is no. So it's not a foregone conclusion. So again, when people are diagnosed, they tend to think, and I did too, gosh, I only have so many years until I go blind or I lose my kidneys or whatever. If you control your blood sugars, you will live a long and healthy life without complications. So control your blood sugars, and absolutely you can just avoid these completely. So that is fantastic news, that don't assume that you're going to get any problems because you have type 1 diabetes. And that leads into the next one. Is my life cut short? When I was first diagnosed, they told me, they literally told me when I was 15, you just lost 10 to 15 years off your life. And it's like, well, thanks. Who's that helping to tell me that information? But it was definitely out there. And still that message kind of percolates that if you have diabetes, your life is cut short. That is absolutely not true. Which leads me to my final point, which is listen up. So if you're, watching this and walking around, making a sandwich or something, this is a time to kind of focus up because this is a very important message. And basically it's this. People with type 1 diabetes have now been shown to be living longer than people without diabetes. And this is huge. Not only are we not, losing 15 years of our lives, if you control your blood sugars, you can live a longer life than somebody without diabetes. And you might say, well, why is that? And I think when you think about it, it becomes pretty obvious. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, we're maybe more inclined to exercise or be a little bit more conscious about our diet or check in with our healthcare providers more. So we're on top of our blood pressure, our cholesterol, not just our diabetes, but our whole overall health. So it's a way of saying that putting in the work can matter, that you can live a long and longer life with diabetes. And this is a graph just showing that. And basically in the bottom is people's A1C. This is following tens of thousands of people with type 1 diabetes. If their A1C is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you can see. And that curve is the mortality versus somebody without diabetes. And that dotted line is where it's basically even. So you can see at an A1C of about 8.5 or so, if as long as your A1C is lower than that people are living longer than people without diabetes. This is just a graph to show you that I'm not pulling this information out of my butt. If you don't understand this graph, it's okay. So the lower your A1C, the better in terms of avoiding complications. But in terms of just your overall long life, as long as you keep it reasonably controlled, you can live a long, healthy life. That's a very important message. So what are the take-homes that I want everybody leaving here with? Well, let's be honest. This disease is no fun. It sucks. You got it, full stop. There will be hard days. There's been times I have literally thrown my phone because it has my continuous glucose monitor. I have this dent in the door in my bathroom because I was so mad about it. Lows when you have to stop what you're doing. There's some real downsides. There will be hard days, but you're now a part of an amazing community. Living, amongst other people with type 1 diabetes is fantastic. I can't tell you the number of times I've been out at a supermarket and just seen somebody with a CGM on their arm or their pump, and you just can't help but want to go talk to them or hug them or whatever. There's this real bond about, what we all go through together. So taking advantage of that community is so important. And I believe that type 1 diabetes can give more than it takes. You will live a long and healthy life if you use it to motivate and inspire you. I met Dr. Edelman through having type 1 diabetes, used type 1 diabetes to go into healthcare. There's so many people that can use type 1 diabetes in their jobs. Even if you're not in health, just the sense of empathy that you get, awareness of other people around you, etc. You can get into national parks for free. There's services at college that you can take advantage of. There really are some positives. So with that, I'll just say thank you. If you are newly diagnosed, welcome to the team. We're happy to have you. Thanks for listening, and hope you enjoy all the stuff we're doing here at TCOYD.